and take all this love and passion and strength and commitment and talk about divorce. Because when we talk about marriage equality, I just want to say within the decade, we have been struggling to divorce couples. And this, I bring this up because it is one of the questions we have from our attendees was also in this post-Dobbs world, if we are looking at more power in terms of decisions about marriage equality returning to the states, what about divorce? Because we've had circumstances where couples were their relationship and their marriage had not been recognized by Pennsylvania. And this was it was recently. I mean, we're talking within 10 years. And so when it was related to whether the state would recognize the marriage, we then had the question of whether the state would allow us to divorce a couple. And if you have to have you have to be in your state for a certain period of time, not everyone has the financial freedom to just relocate for a period of time to a state that can recognize the marriage and consequently divorce the couple. So there are, when we talk marriage equality, there are also some rights that we just too easily assume belong to everyone that don't, such as divorce. So imagine being tied now to someone that you would like to divorce. So looking at that and looking at the question we're being asked, what happens if this, what are we potentially looking at in this post-Dobbs world? What are we looking at if some of these questions are really returning to the state? And I'd like to open that to everyone on the panel and look at what are our fears versus maybe what's actually happening so far too. If we can draw that line too between what we're concerned might happen and also highlight anything already happening that we should watch out for.
Well, I could jump in to flag something that I don't think has been mentioned yet. So before Obergefell, there was the patchwork because there has long been a tradition in family law that the celebration rule, that a marriage that's validly celebrated in one jurisdiction, if you move to another jurisdiction, that jurisdiction will recognize it unless they have a strong public policy against that kind of marriage. And then that was underscored in the Defense of Marriage Act, a piece of federal legislation that said states do not have to recognize same-sex marriages from other jurisdictions, and the federal government is only going to recognize different sex marriages. So the Supreme Court struck down the part about the federal government in a decision called Windsor v. United States. And Obergefell sort of mooted the other section, Section 2, that said states don't have to recognize marriages from other jurisdictions. But after Dobbs, and especially because Justice Thomas wrote a concurrence in Dobbs that said, here is the list of cases that I think we should also overturn, and Obergefell was on there. Congress passed a law, I think in 2022, called the Respect for Marriage Act. And one of the things in that law is that it requires states to recognize same-sex marriages in other states. Now, it's never been tested because Obergefell is still good law. And I believe if Obergefell were to be reversed, you would immediately see states challenging it. So I don't want to cite that law and say that's the answer, but it would at least be slower. There would be a whole lot of litigation figuring out, is the Respect for Marriage Act valid, or are we going back to this true patchwork regime in terms of the recognition? And yes, people were trapped as married because no state had jurisdiction to issue a divorce that was willing to issue them a divorce. But there's at least one kind of good news, one good thing that Congress did a few years ago that at least gives something new to what the argument would be.
I recall a really long time ago, and by the time I had read this, marriage equality was legal in several states, so it was less of an issue. But I remember reading about how civil unions, which, were offered as a very, very blatantly underwhelming alternative, there was no way to end a civil union. And that really is just absolutely terrifying, the way it would still trap someone. If there was any, I guess if there was any correlation between the two processes, what were people doing when they were trapped in this situation? If you recall, did people have options, or was it really just like, we're waiting until there's some legislative change and that we can actually take action and finally end this?
No, I mean there were lawsuits about it where people said, what are we supposed to do here? And they had no success. Like, there were people that it was just unless and until one of you moves to a jurisdiction, that a different state for long enough so that they will say, okay, we have jurisdiction over you. And it still might not settle everything, because a state might be willing to say, we'll issue you the divorce decree, but like, if all your property is in another state, we don't know that, we can't settle that, but you could at least get a document in some circumstances from another state saying, okay, you're not legally married anymore. But the problem is the people kind of talking about these claims, to harken back to my fascinating con law primer, like, what's the right that you're arguing for? The fundamental right to get divorced? This court that looks to history to identify fundamental rights, historically it was very difficult to get divorced. So when, if you're someone trapped in a marriage and saying this is unfair, when you think about how you try to frame, like, what is wrong? What is the claim that I bring? It's not immediately clear. That it's certainly before these courts that there is one. But I will also say that's particularly funny about civil unions, because I got a civil union with my husband before we got legally married. So even if we get divorced, we might still be trapped.
We really can't escape. Like the Hotel California, check out anytime you like. You don't get to leave, though. You don't get to leave. That is just so absolutely wild to think that there's ever been positions like that in place. But we have a few questions that we kind of want to disperse out and see. Some are very particular, some are overall for the panel. But one question we have would be, let's see, Representative Carroll. There is I believe, David Moore, who is actually from the Pennsylvania, I want to make sure because I know the name has changed. The Pennsylvania Equality Project has written in he's the founder of the Pennsylvania Equality Project. And he has written in asking about Representative Kenyatta's bill to cement marriage equality under the Pennsylvania law. Is that something that you're involved in, or something you know a lot about? Anything detail-wise that would be good for us to know about that?
Sure, thank you, Amanda. To my understanding, because I did see the question, I just wanted to right that Representative Kenyatta has prime two bills this year. And what I'm assuming that the bill that he's referring to must be HB 300, which is what Naima was referring to earlier. And if he is referring to HB 300, I myself have already co-sponsored that bill. So I'm 100 in alignment with seeing the Fairness Act get passed and get to the governor's desk. So looking forward to that day, and I think a win for this bill is a win for this community, and it's a win for justice in the Commonwealth.
Have there been any kind of common consensus or attitude on this bill that you've seen from other representatives? Is it generally a favorable item, or is it something that is still maybe controversial, which is insane to think, but
yeah, I don't want to overspeak. I will reiterate that, being here for 9 months, you see some wild things. But the thing that I know about this particular bill, HB 300, it has not been brought up for a vote in committee yet to be brought to the floor. So while I haven't seen that yet, it's not up for debate. So I haven't heard the out loud comments. So if there is comments or discussion happening, it's not being brought to the forefront yet. So if or when that happens, I can update you at a later time.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll definitely check in with you once that's brought to the forefront. And we've got a few other questions. So one that we've got, some of these are very legally worded, so I just want to make sure we got them correctly. I guess one question that we could ask, and this could be open for the entire panel, is essentially what is going on in terms of grassroots movements and strategies for protecting the LGBT plus community in the past couple of years. There's just been so many different things happening and going on. What are we seeing strategy-wise that's most effective? And this might be a great question for Naima, just because in terms of organizing, I've seen campaigns that are social media based. I've seen campaigns that are on the ground. I personally don't know necessarily what is the most effective, and if it depends on location either. If it just different strategies are different in different locations.
Yeah, so I think that the one strategy I am seeing is that we are investing in a narrative change, right? The language that we have been using to advance protections and our rights are now being used against us. And so we're engaging efficiently with narrative change, right? How we talk about the issues. I did want to say to Rep. Carroll, I did, and this is just to anyone, the importance of House Bill 300 and Senate Bill 150 isn't just important to TLGBTQ plus folks, because right now there are people that are perceiving folks to be trans or gay or queer, right? Because of how they look, right? And it's because people are not fitting the societal norms. And so as we expand these protections, it's not just protecting TLGBTQ plus Pennsylvanians, it's protecting us all from the perception of, of our gender identity, gender expression, and sexual orientation. So I wanted to say that. But again, this goes into the narrative change, right? It's how we're talking about the issues, right? Because for so long, we have been restricted from having equal access, right? Equal rights. And so we've been naming the thing, right? Let's get trans care on the books. But now that trans care has been turned into sex change surgeries, right? And so those things are again, are being used against us. So we're investing in that narrative change, but also just this people power, right? I maybe in the last year, and I think that we all kind of felt like the person who occupies the White House and govern us from the president's office was going to win, because the only person, and this is ACLU hat off, since we're being, that the only time this person could win is if they ran next to a woman. Because this country has not really invested in women leaders or Black women at all, right? And so I'm saying that with conviction. And so the reality is that for the last year, we've been building our people power. Like we've been intentional about building that, right? I've been to several convenings over the last year that was bringing Black and brown trans folks together from the South and the North, from the West to the East, right? To talk about the issues, creating this playbook of defense, right? Like we're strategically thinking about in which ways our rights will be attacked and what is going to be our defense, right? How will we protect our people while we fight through the next 3 years, right? Like, yes, next year is an election, right? So we need to be talking about the folks who are sitting in those seats now, right? And so building that people power has been one of our most effective things that we've been, galvanizing on. But yeah, that narrative change is important. They're attacking DEI. And so we're seeing certain schools, change the names of the DEI directors, right? Right. Those are the people's managers, right? And so even though the job description will remove those languages that's being over politicized, the job still entails of what they're trying to do, create safer and affirming environments for us all, so we're all able to thrive in, whether it's in your workplace, whether it's in your schools, whether it's in government, society, right? And so that narrative change is one of them.
I can jump into but again, what when I'm talking to couples all across the country is they are really trying to find ways that they can help organize, be part of change. And so anybody that's either listening or we send out a twice a month newsletter that goes out to 13,000 people. And we would love to put in anything that's going on that we can help educate folks around the country to educate them on how they can get involved, which organizations, because I can tell you, being on the ground with couples, they really want to find a way that they can come together and use their voice collectively. And yes, airport bathrooms are like my worst nightmare. I get stopped every time going to an airport bathroom. I usually get a middle-aged white woman who thinks that she's entitled to tell me that I'm going in the wrong bathroom. So I feel it out there too. just that kind of stuff too. It's like it's crazy. And it's getting worse and worse, just, out there in the world like that too. But so I can sympathize with anyone else that has those little issues, just trying to use a airport restroom. But again, any kind of information anybody has, I have a Facebook group that's got 9,000-10,000 people on it. We've got ways of pushing out information too. So we would love to be able to do that, because I know couples really want that information.
Can I add two quick things too? First, when people are thinking about action, you can have more impact at lower levels. So like, and I'm very guilty of like talking about the Supreme Court all day long, but go to a school board meeting, go to a township council meeting. That makes a huge difference in the everyday life of LGBTQ people. And I've been writing a lot about trans kids in the last few years. School boards are incredibly important. You don't have to have a kid in public school in that district. But if you go to the school board meeting and during the public comment period, get up and say, what are you doing to protect trans kids? Or I think it's important that we talk about the trans and non-binary kids in our district. That's important. If you go to any kind of legislator's town hall or just call their office, they're counting how many people speak up. And that leads to the second point that I want to make, which is probably obvious, but just to make it explicit, I think it's really important to center the voices and the experiences of LGBTQ people, and particularly trans people. But I also think it's really important that trans people aren't the only ones speaking up. So if you hold any kind of privilege, I think it's particularly important to use that, especially on behalf of trans people, who are some of the most vulnerable people in a whole variety of ways. I think it's really important. Like normally I am more wary of kind of speaking for people, but I think it's really important that it's not just trans people talking and saying this is important, this is unfair.
I think a really good example of what you just talked about, in Radnor, there was actually a book ban recently that was reversed. There was a book called, there's several books, one of which was called Genderqueer, which was these 3 books were banned, and the community came together and outcried, and it was almost immediately reversed, and there were articles about it. It was actually very cool. Recently I got to go to Judy Blume's bookstore in Key West, and Judy Blume was there, and she has a table of banned books. And she was talking to me about all the times that she's had people come and tell her stories about these book bans being reversed because someone threw a fit. Someone threw a fit, even if, whatever that looks like. And to talk to Judy Blume, who is one of the most banned authors in education, about these successful reversals of book bans, which I think actually I had never heard of this book prior. I bought a copy for my niece after I saw this. I think it is the coolest thing in the world, and it makes a huge difference, and it supports the author. It supports the community overall. I thought it was one of the coolest stories I've ever read. And then to talk to Judy Blume about it was also just a very, very cool thing.
That's amazing.
And then actually, I have one more question for you, Professor Purvis, and this is definitely a professor question, but you're in such an interesting position education-wise where you are teaching really, really in a very rapidly advancing legal kind of situation. And I'm wondering what your experience as an educator has been in the last couple of years with not only there's, just kind of being like this whiplash with back and forth decisions and changes, but also how do you prepare people who are, future advocates for not only individual clients, but for communities.
Yeah, so it's been a really interesting time to be trying to teach people what the law is, because it has always been in flux. I guess how long is it? Geez, I've been teaching something like sexual orientation, gender identity in the law for about 15 years now. And I have never felt like here is this very clear body of law that's not changing the way that I feel when I teach contracts, for example. But the last few years, and I taught the course this spring, it is an incredibly moving target. And all I can do is acknowledge that to students and try to sort of somewhat keep them updated about what is changing and what might change. But as you know, hopefully, the idea of law school is that we're giving you tools, not necessarily like handing you a package of what the law is and always will be. So I try to take that approach in terms of teaching. But it's been really, really interesting seeing students cope with all of the changes that are taking place. And I have a number of trans and non-binary students who, I saw reacting to Trump's election, to the executive orders that immediately started coming out. And, I am very lucky to be at a school that wants to be a comfortable, welcoming, inclusive place for everyone. I am lucky that I have felt zero pressure to change anything that I'm saying or doing. And I hope that the students feel supported in that way. But one of the things that has surprised me a little bit, or it's not that surprising, I guess, is we have always known how incredibly resilient the LGBTQ community has had to be. But particularly my trans and non-binary students, in some ways, they have seemed less sort of emotional in their reactions. And it's bad because I think they are just in such like, okay, I've got to figure out my to-do list. I've got to start working on the ways to protect myself. And so, that is, I feel bad about that in a way, but I am also so impressed and so, I don't know, heartened by how much energy and strength they bring to their lives and that they'll bring to their future careers. So it's been in a lot of ways a difficult time to be teaching in this space, but I think being around young LGBTQ people has been such a source of hope for me that I won't say it balances everything out, but it is a real positive for me when I am coming into work thinking, what am I doing with my life? Maybe I should be in the street with a brick in my hand. Seeing the students in my classroom has talked me off that ledge, at least for now.
I definitely feel there's times where I really wish I was good enough at math to have gone to medical school instead of law school, because sometimes the things we see in this field are just, it makes your head spin, and it's definitely overwhelming. But I like that you talk about things that are a sign of light, a thing of hope. And I'd like to actually open that to all of our panelists. I'd like, if we can close out. And also I'd like to, if there's any projects or any information you guys want to plug, we have so much going on. You're all so accomplished, just individuals. We want to celebrate anything you've got going on. So we'd want to do that. But if you can share something you're looking forward to, something you find positive or as a source of hope or light, we'd like to close on a positive note and then plug away at anything that you'd want people to know about too.
One thing that gives me hope, and I think the professor shared this, is watching younger TLGBTQ plus folks exist through these trying times, right? We are forced to be resilient, right? Like they use this word brave, like you're so brave, right? But we're forced to do this, right? I myself as a 41-year-old person who blossomed preteen. So I was once them, right? And I didn't know what it was to be resilient, right? I was just existing, right? But to watch how the community is responding and families are responding, right, to all of the attacks, right? Like how folks, and we say this people power, how the people power is coming together in a time of response to the attacks, right, gives me hope that we're going to be okay, right? We've been through this before, right? And so that gives me hope that, you know, we're going to be all right. And so, and also, you know, even though the Constitution was not designed for people like me, we the people includes TLGBTQ plus folks, right? And so the ACLU will stand attest to that, right? That we the people includes TLGBTQ plus folks, right? And so here in Pennsylvania, just know that the ACLU supports the community, right? And if folks need any information about the ACLU, they can visit www.aclupa.org. And if you want to learn anything more about me, you could just Google me, Naima, Naiyamah. Last name is Sanchez, Sanchez, or find me on all social media platforms.
I'll jump in really quick, and I'll start by saying Naima made a really great analogy earlier when Naima talked about the tree, and how if you don't give life to a tree, how it dies. And one of the things it reminded me of an analogy that I had heard, and it talked about all of us being on the boat, and literally saying that, like, there's different groups of people on this boat, and what happens is every single time one group of people get through off the boat, the folks who remain says, well, that has nothing to do with me. And then what happens is another group of folks get through off the boat, and then the people who remain says, that has nothing to do with me. And this continues to happen until the last group of folks is left on the boat, and then what they realize is that they're surrounded, and it's just them by themselves, and now it has everything to do with them, and now they're the last folks to get through off the boat. And it talks about the testament to what it means to be united in unity. And and I think about in a political arena and atmosphere right now, I think about the fact that on the same day that this country reelected Donald Trump back to the White House is the same day that the state of Delaware elected Sarah McBride to Congress. I think about the fact that underneath a Donald Trump presidency, we watched New York City elect an immigrant, a person who's a democratic socialist, a person that's anti everything that Donald Trump is preaching right now, a person who talked about equalities in life, talked about freezing the rent, talked about investing into working class families and individuals. We watched New York City, the biggest city inside of this country, show resistance, and also be a person who had been, accused by multiple women of SA, beat a person who have access to so much money, and and represents just what should be a dark past for America. And I guess think about in this moment right now, you see so much unity across this country. And one thing I know about America is that we've been here before, and I know if we continue to stick together, there are brighter days in this country. So as we end this discussion, fights are sometimes longer than we want them to be. But one thing that we know about elections is that there's a start and there's a finish. And the thing is, after one person leaves office, there's someone that comes behind them that has to do the hard work of putting things back together again. We've seen this before. So I'm excited for the future of this country. And, the moment that we're currently in, this too will come to a resolve, and we will make people whole again.
Well, I can follow up. It was very moving. So thank you. I think what gives me hope is as a mom, my 18-year-old will be heading off to college in the fall, and her generation is just amazing. They're just awesome. amazing young adults out there just carving their own path, and I can see how things will shift and change. And that's super exciting to watch these kids grow and really come into their own, and what it means to be citizens and all of that stuff. So that's inspiring. And then my 7-year-old is absolutely inspiring as well. We live again in a very rural part of Vermont, and my 7-year-old goes to a village school here. She will be a second grader this year, starting this in the fall, and there is all of 11 kids in her class. In the whole school, there's not even 100 kids from pre-K to 6th grade. And those kids don't miss a beat. Marianne and I, everybody knows us, but we're very active in her school. Most of those kids come up to me and call me mama, and they call Marianne mommy, hey mama, hey mommy. They want to show us their report card or what they did in art or whatever, and it's like these kids don't miss a beat. And most of these kids are rural farm kids. And so it's so great. And of course the teachers are awesome, the principal is awesome, and all of that stuff. But it's just so refreshing to see kids like that. Just doesn't even matter. Oh, you have 2 moms. That's great. Awesome. Cool. So that gives me a lot of hope as a parent, to seeing this go. And of course, again, I've mentioned it, but the couples that we meet every weekend are really inspiring. And they're just, it's so awesome to be standing in our event and meet so many wonderful people, and the vendors and the couples. So that's inspiring too, even though I know we have a lot of work to do. It's very inspiring and very uplifting to be in that room every weekend with different folks all across the country. And as a shameless plug, I can't ask enough for the community's help in that grassroots of spreading the word about our events across the country. That would be super helpful. And they can just go to our website at rainbowweddingnetwork.com, and there's a little expo tab, and they would see the full schedule. We have events coming up we still have probably 10 or 12 events this year, and we have already started scheduling for 2026 as well. So just helping to spread the word would be super awesome. And again, thanks for having me on. You talked about the caregiver. Just a little side note, I have to go out and feed baby goats right now. So I've got 4 tiny little baby goats that have to get their bottle. So that's life on the homestead in rural Vermont. But thank you for having me on the panel today. I really appreciate it.
I think being able to feed baby goats might be the key to happiness, honestly. Professor Purvis, I know we already touched on yours a little bit, but if there's anything else on your end that you'd want to close out on, please go ahead.
I'll just say my name is also easily Googled. I mostly just rant on Blue Sky these days. But if anyone had a question or thinks of a question later, or would otherwise like to be in touch, please don't hesitate. I'm always happy to talk about these things. And yeah, I know how the history books about this time will be written. Like, I know who's going to be described as the good guys and the bad guys in the future. The only question in my mind is how long this period lasts. So it's always good to be in community with people who are also fighting and trying to make that period as short as possible. So thanks.